You're listening to the Anthem Award-winning podcast from Rutgers Law School, The Power of Attorney. I'm your host and Dean of the Law School, Joanna Bond. It gives me great pleasure today to welcome Professor Ruth Anne Robbins to the podcast. Ruth Anne, it's such a pleasure to have you on today. Will you begin by telling us a little bit about your origin story?
I'm supposed to tell you the font that I'm using first.
By all means, please do.
Yes, today I'll be speaking in Grandview, one of the best fonts, newer editions. And so my origin story is, I grew up locally. I grew up in Camden County, in Haddonfield. At the time, I was one of only a few Jewish families in the town and only one of the few Democratic voting families in the town. My mother was also one of the only mothers that worked. She was a professor at Penn, and she was actually first-gen college, I'm pretty sure. Her father went to community college for a couple of classes, but she and her brother were first-gen. And my father actually came from a family that helped founded the first agrarian Jewish society in South Jersey.
Wow,
and so,
awesome.
yeah. So, and he went to law school, and instead of going to big law like his friends, he decided he liked small practice, and he really fell in love with civil rights. So I got this education of science and academics and civil rights as growing up in this pretty conservative at the time town.
That is fascinating. And do you feel like that experience informed the work that you do today?
Oh, absolutely. And so, I went to Penn because I was a tuition kid, and majored in science because I was going to be a research scientist, and ended up a lawyer. So, I combined both my parents.
Well, I know that you have a bachelor's degree from Penn in biology. You were also a Westinghouse Science Scholar for your laboratory work. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
So the Westinghouse thing was a fluke. I had spent a summer working in a lab and designing little experiments, or little experiments were designed for me because I was interested in it. And at the end, somebody said, "Hey, why don't you just throw your lab work into this competition, the Westinghouse Science Competition?" And I didn't even pay any attention to the envelope that arrived at our house one day. And my mother found it and said, "Hey, did you open this?" And I was like joking, saying, "Yeah, no, did I win?" She opened it and went, "Yes, yes, you did, you fool."
That's great.
Yes. And so a whole bunch of nice things happened from that. And I thought I was going to have a PhD in one of the microsciences, microbiology or something like that, which would have been like my mother. But I decided I liked the macro better. And I liked thinking in words. And so I also was graduating college right after the 1987 crash. And so it was kind of pick a grad school to go hang out in for a while. So I picked law school.
Right. Not a bad choice.
Right. And then it turns out I actually liked it, which sort of surprised me and everybody. So
that's great. Well, we are now the great beneficiaries of that choice. So I have to ask you one more question about Penn. I know you were in Penn's band, and you played the flute, right? Do you still play?
So in marching band you play piccolo because nobody can really hear a flute.
Right.
So
okay.
I don't still play. My younger daughter, made off with my flute and my piccolo, and she still does some playing, and she was always better at it than I ever was. So she has them.
Oh, that's great. Well, at least you're keeping it in the family.
Yeah.
And what persuaded you to choose Rutgers?
So a couple of things. One was Rutgers gave me a lot of money and really wanted me to come. I think they really sort of liked my background and my LSAT score. And my brother was starting college, and my parents were saying, "You're going to be taking on a lot of debt if you." I had been admitted to a well-known school in a large Midwestern city that is not the University of Chicago. And my parents were like, really, you're going to follow some boy and take on all that debt? And so I was like, you're right, I'll stay home. So I went to Rutgers, and then
Good advice from your
I ended up
parents.
marrying the boy, but
That's great. Well, all's well that ends well.
yeah.
That's fantastic. And you graduated magna cum laude from Rutgers Law.
Hmm.
And I know you joined us as a adjunct professor back in 1996.
Hmm.
What advice would you give to students who want to go to law school from the standpoint of both an alum and a professor here with us?
So remember, I kind of walked into law school as somebody who thought she was going to be a scientist.
Right.
And so the things about law school that surprised me were you are a communicator by profession, and so you better learn to communicate well. And as a professor, I would say the same thing is that I hope you like communicating because that's what you'll be doing, but for your clients. And so but although I knew the scientific method, so I knew a lot of sort of logic or reasoning, I really solidified for me in law school. And so I really like the way I came out of both scientific thinking and legal thinking. And so I would say to people, like, they always say that your mind changes. I think it changes for the better.
Well, it's certainly a perfect blend between your scientific background and your interest in writing.
Hmm.
Uh, you were awarded last year the Thomas Blackwell Memorial Award, which
Hold on, wait. I have to put my prop on. Yes, I was.
oh,
Oh,
wonderful. That's great. Thank you for modeling that for us.
thank you.
It recognizes your work in legal writing and legal storytelling, and your nominators called you "quote unquote" the consummate teacher. What is your favorite part of teaching?
So I get to teach the first years and their first days of law school, and I also get to teach law students later on. And I really love watching the transformation from the first day when I'm using pieces of fruit in a basket to explain, what it means to be rule-based, to the point where I get to see students at the end write briefs that make a difference for clients or work on legislation that really gets enacted, and the transformation that happens in between, and even the transformation that happens between the first day of law school and the end of the first semester, the end of the second semester, is just amazing to watch.
I'm sure it is. And you really play a transformative role in terms of developing students' legal writing abilities. Uh, I want to drill down on that for a second. You've received a number of awards in the field of legal writing, of which you are truly a pioneer. And for those of our listeners who aren't familiar with law and the legal field, can you explain why legal writing and our legal writing program at Rutgers is so important to legal education?
Yeah, legal writing, sometimes talk about how it's a really misnamed field, right? It sounds like a field about composition, and it's actually a field about lawyering. So it's the first place in the first year program where you meet a client, although it is a simulated client, and you have to analyze a problem that the client is facing and come up with what you think, either to counsel or to advocate, what the best legal solution given the facts are, and really help the student, the client get through their legal story. And so, and that's what we do. We communicate on behalf of clients, whether we're counseling them or advocating for them or advocating for large scale change. It's all about communication. And so that's what we're doing in a legal writing program. What makes the Rutgers legal writing program special is that we have for decades had close ties to clinical education. So the professors who are working with the third years, and we've called it this orientation to graduation continuum, where we really try and connect the ideas of, in the first year legal writing program, you meet clients who are simulated clients and learn how to work for them. And then in your third year, unless you're in a second year clinic, you're working with the actual clients, but the lessons you've learned are the same and continuing.
That's fantastic. A really helpful explanation. Thanks for that. And speaking of clinics, you founded our domestic violence clinic back in 2000. Can you tell us a little bit more about what that is and also what your biggest success has been so far within that clinic?
Yes. So actually, the clinic itself opened in 2002. In 2000, I took over the Domestic Violence Project, which is the volunteer where we provide legal information at the courthouse. And that is, I think, one of the longest running programs in the state in terms of providing assistance to people in a domestic violence restraining order system. The clinic is where third-year students practicing under the third-year practice rule can actually go in and help people who are seeking final restraining orders. So the students are handling what are little trials, direct and cross-examination, introduction of evidence. And so they have to put all of their trial advocacy skills to use. And they're also helping people who are in really difficult situations, trying to get them in a better place. And that format of the clinic has pretty much stayed the same since its founding, but the best thing that came out of it was the hiring of Victoria Chase to be the head of the domestic violence clinic at this point in time. And so although I didn't do the hiring, in fact, the people who hired Victoria were a little afraid to introduce her to me just in case I scared her off.
That seems unlikely.
But I mean, and she has modified it and made it so much better. And she's just fantastic as both a professor and as an attorney. And she's really taken it in wonderful directions.
She is amazing. I could not agree more. Well, it's nice to know that the clinic is in great hands now. Uh, let's also plug the Hunter program that
Mhm.
you redesigned at Rutgers Law. Can you tell us what it is and how it prepares students for the courtroom?
So I'm not allowed to call it a moot court because Professor Barbara Gradoff will come, and she's across the hall from me, so she will come and throw things at me.
We don't
Um,
want that.
So what makes this different is it's an appellate advocacy program that I was given really specific goals when I was told to redesign it. Like the dean at the time and the academic dean at the time were like, here are your 10 marching orders and you will make this work. And so it's a program designed actually to bridge between first year legal writing and clinic. And the first semester is all about persuasive writing, and it brings in elements from one of our other courses, which is, all about rhetoric and the scholarship of the discipline. And so students are working in pairs on a large file, and they also have to learn persuasive technique. So it's not just learning the area of law, but it's actually like the psychology behind persuasion. And then in the spring, they're working on public speaking. And yes, it ends with an oral argument competition, which most people think is what Hunter is about, but that's actually the last quarter of the whole program. And so, and yeah, it's
An incredible
designed to be
program.
really hefty, and students have gotten job offers from the oral arguments because they do so well.
I'm not surprised. I had the opportunity to sit in and watch the
Uh-huh.
Hunter competition finals, and the students were unbelievably prepared and so impressive in delivering their arguments. It really was quite astonishing.
Yeah. There's one other thing I want to say about it is that the case files that are used that I started and Professor Godelf continues are also really fact dependent. And so most moot courts are very, split in the circuits, or they're very legal issue oriented. These case files require students to really understand an appellate record and use an appellate record.
That's fantastic. These are skills that they're going to need as lawyers, and so
Mhm.
it goes a long way toward preparing them for the practice of law. That's wonderful. Tell us a little bit about the new legislative and policy advocacy drafting clinic. It's not new in the sense that you've already been doing it for quite some time, but it's now being formed as a clinic. Can you tell us more about that?
So this actually started as a project that students asked me to do, where students had read an article that I wrote about a project we tried in the domestic violence clinic. We wrote an amicus brief to the New Jersey Supreme Court asking them to take a case on that would address this issue of right to counsel, right to civil counsel in domestic violence restraining order hearings. And the Supreme Court denied the petition for certification, but they wrote an opinion about it. And so I wrote an article because it's really rare to see a court opinion about the denial of certification. Mm-hmm. And students reading it later said, why don't we take it to the legislature? Why don't we try? And so as a directed research project, we approached some legislators, and sadly that project has not come to fruition yet. But as part of it, I started teaching a class where we took on other projects, and eventually they became real enough that the clinic wanted to claim this as their own, and I actually really thought it belonged inside the clinic. So now it's going to reopen as a clinic, working on issues mostly in the gender justice space with the New Jersey legislature and associated projects.
That is fantastic. And I love that this really stemmed from conversations that the students brought to you. Mm-hmm. We're teaching them how to be advocates, and they are advocating for systemic reform. Yeah. That's wonderful. Your students have had some impressive victories in the state legislature recently, which have changed New Jersey laws. Is there one in particular that stands out? Yeah, I mean, and I had to sift between a couple. I mean, so I'll talk briefly about one, and then I'll talk about the one that really made the difference. So the one that I think gets the most press because it's easiest to understand is the invasive medical exam, which on Facebook you read about as unauthorized pelvic exam. And so, and this was just a small issue that nobody else in the state was really paying attention to, but it was hot on social media. And we were instrumental in having New Jersey be the 16th state to prohibit doctors and their students from doing invasive, mostly pelvic exams without the patient's consent while they were under anesthesia. That's the one that's easiest to understand. The one that I think is the most pervasive, like the most really changes New Jersey's legal landscape in a positive way, is something that was called originally SASPA, the Sexual Assault Survivor Protection Act of 2015, that I also worked on, and that just got modified. And it's a restraining order system for people who are not in domestic relationships. So it really covers things like sexual assault on campus with people who are not in dating relationships. And it's now been expanded with the work of students to include stalking and cyber harassment. So, and it means that students have, and other people who are not in relationships have a recourse. They can go to court and get a restraining order against somebody who's been stalking them. And the restraining order works in pretty much the same way as a domestic violence restraining order. Well, that seems to fill a really important gap in protection. Well, you may have just answered this question, but I'm going to ask it anyway. What legal accomplishment are you most proud of? So I'm really proud of the legislative work, but I'm also really proud of the scholarship work I did because I opened up 2 new vistas for other legal scholars. And that's, talking about legal storytelling as something more than trial advocacy, as something that we should be doing across the board and really diving deep into what is storytelling and what is legal storytelling. I'm really proud that we're coming up on our 10th biennial conference. So 20 years of conferences that are international. And I'm also proud that I also opened the door to having a conversation of how ugly our legal documents are and how we need to actually pay attention to some document design principles. That's wonderful. Give us just a quick glimpse at what that means. What's a design principle? Instead of using all caps and headings, you should use boldface and sentence case. And so why are we using Times New Roman seriously? Why are we double spacing? It's not readable. So I know that helps. That helps. That also puts into context your joke about the font when we first began. Yep. So if you weren't teaching at Rutgers Law School, what do you think your career would be? What would be your plan B?
I've actually thought long and hard about, it would be teaching somewhere else, but also it would probably be working full time on the legislative and policy stuff. But honestly, it would be wishing I was teaching at Rutgers Law.
That's great. I completely understand that. Now, this last question might be a tough one. I know my answer to this question. Is it true that you make the best raspberry blueberry jam?
Wait, I'm going to put my tiara on again.
Well deserved in this case.
Yeah, it's actually my mother taught me how to make it, and so now I've taught my daughters, so it is a family business.
That's wonderful. Well, having been a beneficiary of some of your jam, I can attest to that. The answer is yes. And finally, I like to add just an open-ended question. Is there anything else you'd like to add to our conversation today before we wrap up?
You're putting me on the spot.
I am.
No.
Okay, fantastic.
Should I have had something? Wait. Should I have had something? What do people say?
No, that's perfect. I mean, one of the things that I'm sure you teach your legal writing students is to be concise, so that you're modeling that behavior for us.
Can I actually re-answer it then?
Yes.
Okay,
Absolutely.
know when it's time to cut off the document. Okay, so if you ask the question again, I'll say yes. Know when it's time to end.
All right, fantastic. That's great. Well, thank you so much for being with us today, Ruth Anne. It's really a pleasure to talk to you, and I appreciate you taking the time.
No, thank you for having me. I am honored you chose me.
Absolutely. Well, take care.
Okay, thanks.
The Power of Attorney is a production of Rutgers Law School. With 2 locations just minutes from New York City and Philadelphia, Rutgers Law offers the prestige and reputation of a large, nationally known university with a personal, small campus experience. Learn more today by visiting us at law.rutgers.edu.